Welcome to the Parsha Pairings with Jeff and Sherry. I'm Jeff Friedlander.
And I'm Sherry, and we're so glad to have you with us today. Just want to encourage you that however you're receiving this, we want to make sure that you like and share to let other people also enjoy the teachings that you've enjoyed. We would love to hear from you, so please do comment and let us know your thoughts. We love connecting with you in that way. And if you're on our YouTube channel, please be sure to click the bell so that you'll receive notifications every time we upload a new teaching.
So Sherry, today we're into a new book. We are moving through. We've now got into the book of Numbers, or Bamidbar is the Hebrew word for it. It means in the desert or in the wilderness. As we will find in this book, they're going to spend 39 years roughly in the wilderness in this book. It's a 40-year period. We're starting in Numbers chapter 1. Going through verse 1 to chapter 4, verse 17 is the Torah portion. We're going to be studying that today. The Haftorah reading this week is Hosea chapter 2, verse 1 through chapter 2, 22. And then the Brit Hadashah, or New Testament reading, is Matthew 4, 1 through 17, and Romans 9, 22 through 33. So the book starts out, and they've been at Mount Sinai. They're going to be at Mount Sinai for about a year, the first year, and that's the first 8, 9, 10 chapters of this book is that year at Sinai. And we see several things happen. Then they're going to move from there, and they're going to get out into the wilderness, heading towards the promised land, but they're going to do some sin. And in that sinning and that anger, and that it just kind of goes downhill, God's going to let them know, okay, you have now messed up. And so for the foreseeable 40 years, you're going to be walking around in this desert. And so now they're going to be in the wilderness for that next 39 years roughly. And that's the bulk of the rest of the book. Right. The end of the book, the last few chapters of the book, give us some new laws and new prescriptions on what they're going to do when they get into the land. And that's kind of how it's laid out. And so the book is broken down into 3 kind of sections. So we'll start out right at the beginning, chapter 1. In the wilderness of Sinai is Hebrew, or Sinai. On the first day of the second month, in the second year from the exodus from the land of Egypt, Adonai spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting, saying, do a head count of all the community of Bnei Yisrael by their families and their ancestral house, with a total of every male one by one. By the way, we're going to knock out 4 different census just in these first 4 chapters. And so this is where the book gets its name, because Numbers is kind of that idea that there's a lot of counting going on. Right. So Sherry, what happens here? Why are we counting up folks here?
So they're preparing. Really, this is a military count.
The first one.
The first one, and we're going to describe what each of the censuses are, because you're going to see there's different qualifications for what they're counting and why. But this one was for military purposes, to find out how many able-bodied men that they have from each of the ancestral tribes. Now we need to kind of back up a little bit to understand what we're looking at. So all the way back to Jacob, he had 12 sons.
Right.
These become the 12 tribes of Israel. They all end up in Egypt. They lived those 400 plus years in Egypt, and now Moses has just rescued out those ancestors out of Egypt, and this is who's standing here.
Yeah.
Now they're still in tribal mentality, which is very different from our Western understanding of family. Yeah. There's variances and differences to how a tribe operates as compared to even a Western family idea. So we've got to kind of think through that a little bit. But they all go back to the ancestors. So you have the tribe of Reuben, you have the tribe of Gad, you have the tribe of Judah. Obviously, those ancestors are ancestors. Yeah. They've passed on, but they carry forth that family ancestral name. What happens is you've got out of each of those tribes, you have leaders that rise up, and it's typically the firstborn.
Which is going to come into play as we go through this. Right. We're going to see some changes in that are very unique. These tribes are sometimes referred to as clans also. This is what we call in Hebrew mishpachah. This is our family. Right. And these tribes work together as a community. When they come out of Egypt, there are individual family units, a mom, a dad, a kid, etc. But those family units are so integrated into the clan or the tribe that it doesn't, as Sherry said, you really got to back off the Western mentality. The Western mentality is my 4 and no more, right? We're just really our family, that's it. That is not how
Right.
they lived.
They
That's not how
live-
they thought about life.
Right.
They didn't have that concept like it's just me and you, and then there's other families, and we get to
Right.
know them, but we don't, we're not
And
related
it's
to
not
them.
like we have a family reunion with the grandparents and the aunts, and
Yeah.
they're living all together.
Yeah.
And they do, and really one of the advantages to that is in a fighting situation, in
Yeah.
a warfare situation, you're actually going to fight with more fervency
Yeah.
to protect your family,
Yeah.
as opposed to the idea of just protecting a nation. So they've just gone through the marriage ceremony,
Yeah.
so they are becoming a nation.
Yeah, they're in the process of being a nation.
They're in the process of
So
that.
Sherry, tell us about this word chieftain, because we have this kind of feeling here of a tribal chieftain.
Right, so this becomes that firstborn who is set aside as to lead the family. They inherit the double portion. They inherit the properties of the tribal properties. They also take on the role of a priesthood in ways.
Yeah.
They're leading this clan in a way of spiritual truth. They're leading them in the way they're going to be structured
Yeah.
and move forward. So they really hold a very, very, very important role. And you'll see that what they're asking for in verse 3, you and Aaron are to muster up the divisions, every son from 20 years and upward, that's available to serve in the army of Israel. One man from each tribe, each head of his father's household, is to assist you. So they're calling these tribal leaders forth.
Yeah.
So they're bringing forth 12 men, and God says, now instruct them to go and count their clan, count their ancestor, and report that number back.
And this is interesting because when you think about qualifications for war, here they're saying if you're 20 years old and you're a man, you're in war. You're a warrior. You're
Right.
part of. Our military does it at 18. There are other militaries in Rome when the Roman Empire was
They
was
conscript
big. They said
17-year-olds.
17. Europe, there's some nations in Europe that go as young as 13. Which is
13.
kind of crazy. But there is no upper age limit. So if you're a male, you were part of the military.
Right.
You were if you were called up, you were battling, and that was the way
Right.
it worked. And the leaders of the households were the ones that helped with this census. So Moses numbers them. Verse 19 says, Moses numbered Israel in the wilderness of Sinai, just as Adonai had commanded him. And he goes through and lays out each of the tribes, and they get a number for each of these tribes.
And you're going to see the pattern is, for instance, verse 20, the sons of Reuben, again, that tribal leader, the ancestral tribe, Israel's firstborn, their generations, their families, by ancestor, households, according to the count of their names, every male from 20 years and upward, all available for the army. Those counted from the tribe of Reuben were 46,500. And it goes through each tribe in that same
Repeats
pattern.
the pattern,
Same pattern.
And then it totals up, and so we get a total at the end. Verse 46 says, all those who were counted totaled 603,550. So people ask, how many people came out of Egypt?
Yeah.
So we're 1 year removed from Egypt. We're in the second year they've come out of Egypt, and we've counted up 603,550 20-year and up males.
Right.
So be below 20 years, we don't know how many kids there were below 20 years, and we don't know the number of females, but we know that had to be mamas around, right?
Right.
So the estimates by scholars is anywhere between 1.5 million to 2 million people when you add in wives, you add in brothers and sisters, and you add in younger
Aunts
than 20.
and uncles.
You get all the grandparents and all that.
Yeah.
They estimate 1.5 to 2 million people, and that's part of where this number comes from. It helps us to see, okay, we got a 600,000 fighting for. By the way, the military of the army, I didn't get the latest number, but a few years ago I counted it was somewhere near 400,000 in our army in the U.S.
Wow.
And so this is a very large army. This
And
is
I
a lot of
think it's
people.
important to take note of that when you think about what's going on. They're in a desert. When you think further on about the miracles that we're going to read about, the manna food, the water, the traveling, everything they do, this is not for a small little band of 12 people that came out of Egypt. This is a huge number of people, which gives you a little more grace for Moses to understand when that many people are complaining, you might go, oh, I get it. That's a lot of complaints to be coming. But what's interesting to note, Judah registers as the largest tribe with 74,600 people.
Yeah.
You've got the combined tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh, who are, remember, Joseph would have been the 12th, would have been one of the sons of Jacob.
Yeah.
But Jacob adopted his children, Ephraim and Manasseh, into and becoming his own children, and then those two are divided into their own camps. And so if you think about Joseph, the tribe of Joseph, which is not how it's recorded, would be Ephraim and Manasseh, and they're the second largest tribe, which is about 72,200, and the smallest tribe is Benjamin, which is 35,400. So you see that there's differing sizes in each of the tribes, and you're going to see when you read their history, there's a lot of infighting that goes on. These aren't like they're like, oh, we're so happy that we're brothers and we're the children of Israel. There's infighting that happens among them.
And interestingly, the tribe of Benjamin, we read in verse 47, Levi. The Levites, however, were not counted by the tribe of their ancestors. Adonai told Moses, saying, definitely you are not to number the tribe of Levi, nor take the sum of them among Bnei Yisrael. Instead, appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, its implements and all pertaining to it. They carry the tabernacle and all its utensils, tend it, and camp around it. So here we see the tribe of Levi is not even in these numbers. So we know the more people there. And by the way, I just did a quick search to make sure my numbers weren't totally off the top of my head. In the U.S. military, the latest numbers in 2018, I'm sure there's more modern numbers, was 1.3 million, but that's that's all 5 branches of military. So when you look at the Army, it was a little bit less, it's less than that. Yeah. And so this is the size of our military, basically part of our Army. This is an amazing number of people, and it doesn't include the Levites. One of the things that we should just say as a mention here is that this is going to lay out an order. This whole chapter, these first 4 chapters are really going to give us an order to this system that we're going to see in a moment. The way they camp is ordered, but this is the first piece of that. Number 1, you're counting the right people. You're setting up your defenses. But number 2, you're also telling the duties of the Levites, that the Levites are going to have a certain amount of duties, and this is what they're going to do. God is ordered, and his people will be as well.
That's exactly right.
So we move from there, and we start getting to the camping.
I think part of that order, what you see in this verse 51, is what God is setting up here to do is he's going to set up how you've got the tabernacle and how everybody's going to encamp. Because remember, we're going to be, they're not wandering in the desert. I know we've said this over and over, but it's just such a great point to make. They were not wandering in the desert. They were led.
Yeah.
They only looked like they were wandering according to Pharaoh's view.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't understand what was happening. But they're being led. So when that fire moves or that cloud moves, they can't just willy-nilly all get up and go.
Yeah.
And when we get to chapter 4, we're going to see that God took care of that, and he knew exactly what to do. And this tribe of Levi that's being called out doesn't end up getting land, and they're surrounding the tabernacle. Yeah. So you have the tabernacle, and then the Levites encamp around that, and then we're going to see how God sets them up.
And even within the Levites, the priests are the closest to the tabernacle. So the tabernacle's in the center of the camp. That's the presence of God. You can certainly hear spiritually what this means for us.
Right.
The tabernacle's in the center. The priests, those who are the intercessors, the ministers, the ones who will do the sacrifices, are next, and then they're the smaller, kind of specialized part of the Levites. Then the Levites camp, and then the rest of the tribes, and we'll get to those in a moment. So
right.
All right, chapter 2, we dig in. So Adonai says to Moshe and Aaron, saying, let each man encamp under his own standard among the banners of their ancestral house at an appropriate distance from the tent of meeting. Those camping on the east toward the sunrise will be the standard of Judah according to the divisions. Nachshon, son of Aminadab, is the prince of the sons of Judah. His division by their numbers is 74,600. We're not going to read all these. That's just an example of what it's going to be laid out as.
Can I just say, it's so interesting that there is no description of what these banners look like and these standards, these flags that they have.
A banner is a flag, for those that don't know. It's something like the American flag is considered a banner. It's the banner of America.
Standard.
So we would hold that up, and everybody knows who we are.
And there's no description in the Bible. Now, if you do a Google search of it, you're going to see these beautiful banners with, like a lion and colors. And there's speculation, and some teach that each tribe had its own color that coordinated with the ephod that the high priest would wear. But the scripture doesn't actually tell us specifically what that is. We do know that the priest, the ephod, is to remember the tribes, but we don't know what color is assigned to each one. That's all speculation. And I think it's with great wisdom, because I think in our idol worship nature, we would want to worship a banner.
Yeah.
And go, oh, maybe I'm from the tribe of whatever, and that becomes our idol.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that God leaves that out and leaves it to let us know they had a way to recognize. So when Judah peels out first, then you see his standard, then the next tribe knows when to go because they see that theirs is coming. You know how to fall into line.
And in the scripture, there's only 4 standards mentioned. We've added to it in the traditions, and a lot of it comes out of Jewish tradition. Jewish custom has assigned a color stone and a banner to each of the tribes. But the reality is there's only 4 banners that we know of in the scripture, and it's the 4 lead tribes that are setting up as they set up the diagram. You would have the tribe of Judah with their banner, and then the other 3 tribes that are behind them are setting up behind them. And so they're just following that one banner. It's not necessarily true that all of them had a banner. Right. It's possible, but
the scripture doesn't indicate
the scripture
that.
It's a custom, and so we just need to recognize that and not build more of a case than is there.
But I want to link us into something that sometimes we may miss on the way that they're structured, because it goes through the rest of this chapter telling exactly where the tribes are, to which side of the camp, which side of the tabernacle they are. And when you look at the tabernacle, the place to the east of the tabernacle is the prime real estate. That's where the most prestigious. It's where the most prestigious tribes are placed. It's actually where we'll read about in chapter 4. Spoiler alert: where Moses and Aaron are positioned.
Yeah.
Then you keep going down. You go south. That's the second most prestigious place to be. And then you go to the west, and the least prestigious is in the north. Now, why do I bring all that up? Because this is so interesting. To the east is the tribe of Judah, and you have Issachar and Zebulun. These are all children of Leah. Now, let's go all the way back to Jacob. He married 2 wives, right? He loved Rachel. This is the one that he pined for. He worked for 7 years. Laban tricked him, gave him Leah, and he didn't love her as well. But then he does get Rachel. He works for 7 more years, and he gets his beloved Rachel. But Leah's womb is the one that's opened first. And she actually has the majority of the children of Jacob's. As a matter of fact, Judah is hers, Issachar, as well as Gad. And these are all Zebulun. These are all Leah's kids that are on this eastern side of the tabernacle. Then when you go to the south, you've got Reuben and Simeon, who are her first and second born children. Then you have Gad, who is from her concubine. So these are all Leah's children to the east and the south, the most prestigious places. Yeah. It's as if God said, Jacob, what you value, I see differently. Yeah. Because we don't really know why God opened Leah's womb over Rachel's, why Rachel was the beloved and God didn't honor that in Jacob. Maybe because Jacob was a trickster. Yeah. And he got tricked into, getting not the wife. We don't know, but it's just interesting to know God didn't willy-nilly just draw lots for the names, right? Then when you go to
west,
when you move up to the west, you've got Ephraim and Manasseh, which are the 2 tribes of Joseph. Yeah. This is Joseph, which is Rachel's son. Yeah. And then you have Benjamin. Those are all Rachel's children. Yeah. So when you've got the tabernacle on the east, you've got Leah's kids. In opposition is Rachel's kids.
Which kind of sets up the jealousy that was going on between Rachel and Leah.
It's you see that picture, that there's something about those patterns of how they were born and who they were born to. God sets it even into motion here in the way that they're designed to stand.
And to the north we have Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. They're the sons of the concubines of Bilhah and Zilpah, and they're under the banner of Dan. And so,
which is very interesting about Dan. We just went to Israel and learned about this. Dan did not like it's interesting, he's to the north of the tabernacle, and he didn't really like his land that was allotted to him in Israel once they get into the promised land, and he actually moved to the furthest northern part of Israel and became an idol worshiper and brought in all kinds of horrible stuff.
He's the first major idol worshiper in the nation.
So I think it's interesting that, it's as if our God knows.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
as if he knows what's coming and,
And so-
and what's going on.
And so when they traveled, so they've got this camp set up. They've got the tribes of the east, the south, the west, and the north surrounding the tabernacle. When they broke camp, the east would advance first, then the south, then the Levites with the tabernacle, then the west and the north. So this is a military formation. So
Right.
east goes, south goes, falls in behind. Then the tabernacle and the priest are going, and the Levites, and then behind them are the ones from the west, and they're pulling up the rear. So it is a protection of the priest and the tabernacle, a surrounding of that, but it has the biggest tribes going first, and the most prestigious, as Sherry said, going first. They travel together, but you got to remember they're still individual. It's like a military unit. You got different military groups going.
Right.
They're individual units, but they are working as a community together. They don't become a nation fully until later. They're becoming a nation, and eventually under King David, they will be the nation of Israel as one unit.
So moving into chapter 3, we're going to get some specifics about the Levites now. And starting in verse 11, it says, Then Adonai said to Moses, saying, See, I have taken the Levites from among Bnei Israel in place of the firstborn who opened the womb among Bnei Israel. The Levites will be mine, because all the firstborn are mine. In the day when I was striking down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated to myself every firstborn in Israel, whether man or animal, as mine. I am Adonai. Now, this is a huge thing that is happening.
Yeah.
We read that and go, oh, that's so cool. Yeah, the Levites are set about and it's set apart, and he's taking them as the firstborn, right? So we already discussed how the firstborn it was an office. They were in charge of the family. And God is now shifting that from them. He's now moving it into just this one tribe. The tribe is now going to have the office of priesthood. No longer will it be this firstborn. So there's this shift in governmental structure that's happening.
This is big.
It's really big. Now, one of the things that sometimes we miss that's also happening here is this is a huge shift from the culture they've been living in and the cultures of ancient Mesopotamia and ancient world that they were living in. There was a lot of ancestral worship going on. And so what they would do is when your father would die, the firstborn's responsibility would be to go and pay homage, bringing foods and all kinds of things in order to garner the favor of the ancestors that had passed on. So this was part of the cultural norm. Now remember, Israel has been living in Egypt. They've been living and they're observing and they know what's going on in the other cultures. So God is setting this apart to go, it's not the firstborns, that's not their job.
Yeah.
They're not the priest over their family. I'm putting it now into another governmental structure. I'm calling them forth as the father.
Yeah.
I'm setting them aside as the father. And I'm saying, no, that's not how we're going to do it.
Right.
The firstborn continues to, like I said, maintain the inheritance. They continue to get the double portion. But they're not in that position, that same positioning of priesthood that now the priests are. Now, it goes on to talk about another head count that we're going to see. Adonai spoke in the sign of, this is verse 14, count the sons of Levi. So this is our second census we've seen. According to their ancestral house, by their families, every male, now we get a different qualification. A month old and upwards you are to number them. So Moses numbered them in accordance with the word of Adonai, just as was commanded. So now we're getting a head count of the Levites. Yeah. They were left out of the one we just did, so now we're counting the Levites. But we're counting from a month old and up. Now, what's interesting about this, and these are just the males again.
Yeah.
The sages have brought down that at 8 days old, a male is circumcised, and they're considered, at 8 days old, they're brought into the covenant. They're brought into becoming an Israelite. But they don't consider until they get to 30 days old, a month old, that they transfer into what one of the words is not human status, but their status shifts at 30 days old to avoid there being premature birth or anything where that child does not come to. At 30 days, there's a shift in the Jewish understanding of the status of a baby. So some of that tradition comes from this. This is where God has said it's a month old. This is when that status shift happens in a child's life.
And because it's the Levites that are being counted here, it's the idea of saying they are going to be the ones responsible for the tabernacle, for managing the presence of God. But there's another unique thing here. This word in Hebrew has a connotation that there's a recording going on. And some have speculated, and we don't necessarily say this is true, it's just a total speculation, that the way the word is written in Hebrew,
where it says, so Moses numbered them, that word numbered could be that God actually did the numbering and he just gave it to Moses, and Moses was then just writing down. He didn't actually go through and count everybody. And if that is true, and that's a big if, we don't have evidence of that, that's just a extrapolation of the Hebrew a little bit. One of the other reasons, and if you don't mind me interrupting, in addition to that, is because there's no one specifically called to count them.
Right.
And Moses, when you see the number, it ends up being 22,000. Moses did not go through and count 22,000.
And so this would have the meaning that God is the one who is determining who is responsible for service in the Mishkan, the tabernacle, because God is the one who counted the people and counted those 22,000. Okay?
So keep that number in mind. We're going to connect that in a minute.
So the next several verses 17 through 38, are going to go through and detail out the sons of the Levites by their clans, and it's going to give them their position all around the tabernacle and tell them exactly what they're going to be doing. This is where God is giving us more order to the way we've ordered the military. We've ordered now where all the tribes are how they're going to move and how they're going to function together and where they're going to camp. Now we're getting specific to the Levites and saying, okay, here's how you camp, and your specific job is X, Y, Z. Right. And that's that whole next section. We're not going to go into details there. It just gives you the picture of God's ordering the plan. Then we kick into the third census, which is in the opening since the opening chapters. And this gets even more specific because we're going to get into what's called the redemption of the firstborn. So we're in chapter 3, verse 40.
So we've counted we've counted the 1 month olds, and now we're going to do what they do is he goes through and he takes the number of the Levites, the males a month old, and it's 22,000. Then he goes through and he says, count every firstborn male of Bnei Yisrael from a month old. Now this is Bnei Yisrael.
Not just
so this
Levites.
Is of all the tribes. You've got the Levite, and then you go to Bnei Yisrael. Set out the Levites apart from me in the place of all the firstborn of Bnei Yisrael, and all the livestock of the Levites in place of the firstborn of the livestock of Bnei Yisrael. So you're counting the firstborn of the Levites, of the cattle and the humans, and the firstborn of Bnei Yisrael. Yep. So Moses counted all the firstborn of Bnei Yisrael as Adonai commanded him. The sum total of the firstborn of the males of Bnei Yisrael, 1 month old and upward, listed by name, was 22,273. Verse 44, again Adonai spoke to Moses, take the Levites in place of all the firstborn of Bnei Yisrael, and the livestock of the Levites in place of their livestock. The Levites will be mine. I am Adonai. To redeem the extra 273 firstborn of Bnei Yisrael, exceeding the number of the Levites, you are to collect 5 shekels for each, based on the shekel of the sanctuary, which is 20 gerahs. Give the money for the redemption to the extra ones of the firstborn of them to Aaron and his sons. So Moses collected the redemption money for these exceeding the number redeemed by the Levites. From the firstborn of Bnei Yisrael, he collected the 1,365 shekels according to the sanctuary shekel. So we've got this exchange happening. Now, redemption requires a payment. God is saying, I'm taking the Levites as my own. I'm taking it out of that firstborn status.
Right.
They're going to be mine. But there was more firstborns in Bnei Yisrael than there were of Levites. So in order to redeem those, there was a price paid.
Yeah.
The 5 shekels according to the sanctuary shekel, and that went into the coffers of the Levites. Since that time, there was a tradition that carried on in the Jewish practice called Pidyon Haben, where they do still do a redemption of the firstborn son. And there's actually, you can buy coins. There's 5 coins that you can buy called Pidyon Haben coins of redemption, and it's something that continues to carry on today in Jewish practice. But this is what's happening: is this God is purchasing his Levites. He's purchasing the priest to give them this status.
And I think what's interesting about that is God is showing a couple principles here. One, redemption cost.
Yeah.
2, to be a priest cost. And 3, it's a beautiful picture, really, of the specialness with which God is an accountant. He's basically a CPA at this point.
Right.
He's numbering everything perfectly and then saying, hey, we're over the top here. We'll pay it out and we'll get it right. He balances the scales.
Yeah.
God is showing that he is a just God who balances the scales. Now we jump into chapter 4, our last chapter to go through today.
And we're just doing the first 17 verses.
The first 17 verses, which gives us a beautiful picture.
Another census.
This is the fourth census.
One.
The census of the sons of Kohath, and he's one of the 3 sons of Levi originally. And he's the grandfather, I guess, of Moses. Mm-hmm. Moses is a Levite, and Kohath has a son named Amram, who is the father of Moses. And interesting to note, all of Leah's biological children are in these prime spots around the tabernacle that we've talked about a few moments ago.
Yeah.
Reuben, Simeon, the Levites, Judah, all of these are around there. So it's very interesting. Moses, though, doesn't even cross into the promised land, and he's a Levite too.
Yeah.
But he doesn't get to see that. This word Kohath, the idea of it being the Kohathite, is that right? Is that how you say it?
Kohathites.
Kohathites. They are the part of the Levi had 3 sons. So they get the Gershites, the Kohathites, and the
Merarites.
Who?
Merarites.
Yeah.
Merari.
All these ites, man. So the Kohathites. This word means in Hebrew an assembly or a gathering. So later we'll see a word, a kehilah, or a kahel, and that word means to gather or assemble, and that becomes the gathering of the believers, those who are of the faith, which eventually becomes those who go to the synagogue, which eventually becomes in the New Testament the ecclesia. The Greek word ecclesia comes from this word, the kehilah, or originally Kohath.
So what's interesting to note is Kohath, it, like you said, means gathering, and this blessing transfers down the line into Moses.
Yeah.
Who, what is his job? He's gathering Israel. He's gathering them out of Egypt to gather them into this nation.
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting to note when God does define, and when you go back and read the parsha, you'll see Kohath is to the southern border of the tabernacle. Now, what's interesting, we just learned this when we went to Israel just recently. The southern steps that lead up to the temple are a mammoth steps. And in first century times, the rabbis would gather, their students that they were teaching, and they would gather on the southern steps, and they would teach in little pods and whatnot. Yeah. Yeshua did the same thing. He would gather his disciples, he would gather people, and they would, on this southern steps, the southern positioning from the presence, from the tabernacle, where Kohath was established, and it was told that was his grounds to be on that southern part of the tabernacle. We fast forward and we see this is exactly where Yeshua would have come. Yeah. Who becomes our high priest.
These are the teaching steps, if you will. Interestingly, as a final note, the Kohathites are told in verse 17, Adonai spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying, "You're not to let the families of the tribe of the Kohathites be cut off from among the Levites. Do this for them, so that they may live and not die whenever they approach the most holy items. Aaron and his sons are to go into the sanctuary and assign each man a job and responsibility. But the Kohathites are not to go in to look at what is holy, not even momentarily, or they will die. So the Kohathites had a job. They had a specific job. They were in the intimacy of the Levite tribe. They were part of that calling, but they could not go into the holy place or they would die. They were on the outside by the steps. That's where they ended up being, and they were the teachers, which is interesting when you take Moses, that he also could not enter into the promised land.
And I also want to make a note, because it does tell us in verse 2, I want to make sure to bring this in, that this census was taken of those men 30 to 50 years old.
Yeah.
This tribe was going to be the one that's responsible when they broke camp to carry all the things in the Holy of Holies and the holy place. We see later, like you had said, they're not even allowed to look at it or they will die. Poles were put into each of the articles so they could carry it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, 30 to 35 years old, that's curious. This was a dangerous job they were given. You did not want someone with impetuousness going, I can go grab it real quick. I mean, you're getting people of maturity, people who have emotional stability in their life so that they can carry out this role. Plus, it's considered, according to the sages have brought down, that at 30 years old is the prime of a man's strength. So if they're going to be carrying these heavy items, God wanted the right men with the right mind that matched a right and physical body.
All right, so that's Bamidbar, the first parsha of the book of Numbers. And until next time, we say God bless you and shalom.
Shalom.